And so it's a very peculiar and unique solitude and silence. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Leaf by Leaf. Today we're continuing the Why Do We Read Fiction series. And to be honest with you, I almost did not make this video because the revelation or discovery that I'm bringing to this video, after it came to me, it seemed obvious. And I thought to myself, is it even necessary to put this out there? But before it was brought to my attention, it wasn't very obvious. So I decided that just in case you're like me and you're the type of person who has to have obvious things brought to their attention, why not, you know? So today I'm taking my cue from a little book called How Reading Changed My Life by Anna Quindlen. And Anna Quindlen, if you're not familiar with her, she's one of these wunderkinds who has done everything from fiction, nonfiction, memoir, aphorisms. Maybe she hasn't done poems. Maybe that's the only thing, which I'm sure she's done them on her own. They just haven't been published. Or maybe they have. I haven't looked into that. But she worked for the New York Times as a journalist. She worked for Newsweek as a columnist. I mean, she's just a born reader and writer. And she's got one of these personalities and the styles that come through in her writing. It's just so inviting. She's just a likable person. You think to yourself, I'm in the presence of a beloved family member when you're reading her work. But this slim little volume I took with me just recently on our annual October mountain getaway that we've done each year with a set of friends since 2015. So this was our 9th year. And I was able to just dip in and out. And we'd sit around the living room all talking and having fun and just hanging out. They all know me as the bookworm of the group, and they're okay with me just dipping out unexpectedly and unannounced onto the deck to look out across the mountains and this beautiful view and the foliage of the trees and dip into my book. And this one was just like taking in pure oxygen. She covers a lot of ground in a mere 70 pages. She covers her childhood, which is completely intertwined with books, with reading. She captures the social stigma, or I should say antisocial stigma, around bookworms, the cultural illegitimacy of an adult who reads fiction, the canon wars, low, middle, and highbrow literature, literary theory, reading lists, banned books, the fate of print, the fate of printed books. She's very much in line with Heather Cass White's Books Promiscuously Read in her prescribed approach to reading and establishing your own canon, the freedom to graze the fields of literature, to make personal discovery. She says, perhaps only a truly discontented child can become as seduced by books as I was. Perhaps restlessness is a necessary corollary of devoted literacy. And it can almost seem a paradox, of course, that someone who's truly restless and discontented would find the antidote in books, because on the outside it can seem like the act of reading wouldn't scratch that itch, but indeed it does, because this is the first quote that I underlined in this book, and because it immediately popped out at me, because outside of when I'm sitting reading a book, I'm very restless, very ADHD, ADD. I want to be on the go. I want to be traveling. And then I came across this. I did not read from a sense of superiority, meaning a sense of elitism, or I'm reading because I want to be better than others, or advancement, meaning I'm not reading to advance my career or to necessarily improve myself, which usually lends itself to an advancement in career or something like that, or even learning. I read because I loved it more than any other activity on earth. And that is precisely the obviousness that I was talking about at the beginning of this video. When I read that, I read because I loved it more than any other activity on earth. That popped out at me. Reading as activity. And the fact that she just simply loved it more than any other activity. So anything that could be at our disposal as an activity to pass the time, let's say. And that really started my wheels turning and thinking about of any activity I could turn to, why is it reading fits the bill for me better than any other activity? Better than listening to music, better than fishing, better than golfing. I don't do either of those, but knitting, crocheting, baking, watching a movie, watching sports. When I'm presented with an hour, it is reading that I want to do above any other choice as activity. And so that got me thinking, what is it about the activity, the action, or inaction really, that it seems on the outside of reading that is such a draw? And the two things that stuck out the most, silence and solitude. That is, you are alone and it is silent. It's not true silence, I guess, because as Michael Silverblatt called it in his interviews with John Berger, he called it a worded silence. I have always loved that. And it really struck me as I was sitting alone in a rocking chair on the deck, overlooking these beautiful mountains with my book in hand and my head against the back of the rocking chair and ruminating on this idea of reading as my favorite activity and its salient features being solitude and silence, while to sharpen the whole moment behind me in the house in the living room, I can just hear the muffled tones and intermittent laughter of my 5 other companions. And I thought to myself that it is silence, I think, above all, that reading affords me, that reading provides for me. My exterior and interior life is fairly noisy, not in a bad way, but between my job and all of my other things that I do, there is a need for solitude and silence to counterbalance everything. And both are needed. Too much of one or the other would tip the scales in such a way that would cause me to lose equilibrium. And so even though this solitude and silence achieved through the activity of reading could be seen as antisocial, it actually improves my social life because it balances me out. Another way of saying this is taken from Palace of Books by Roger Granier. And he says, one retreats into oneself in order to communicate better with others. And so it's a very peculiar and unique solitude and silence that apparently people with my makeup need often in order to engage appropriately with life and others. And I think this really flies in the face of our culture. As Quindlen puts it, while we pay lip service to the virtues of reading, the truth is that there is still in our culture something that suspects those who read too much, whatever reading too much means, of being lazy, aimless dreamers, people who need to grow up and come outside to where real life is, who think themselves superior in their separateness. There is something in the American character that is even secretly hostile to the act of aimless reading, a certain hale and heartiness that is suspicious of reading as anything more than a tool for advancement. And I think this is why whenever people tell me, say at work, that they're readers, it's always, James Clear's Atomic Habits or something of that ilk that comes out first. And it takes a while to admit that they also dip into, say, Game of Thrones. And I think that this act of reading in silence, in solitude, does achieve something. It's just not as clear as our metrics obsessed culture would like it to be. As Quindlen says, all of reading is really only finding ways to name ourselves and perhaps to name the others around us so that they will no longer seem like strangers. And so now it makes sense to me why I need silence to read, why I usually can't even have light jazz or classical music playing while I'm reading, why I absolutely cannot read in public. Because when I'm in public, all the people around me are infinitely more interesting than my book, believe it or not. And I can't focus on the book for anything because of my insatiable need to people watch. I always just chalked it up to my ADD and distraction. But I believe it is because of this craving for silence, a peculiar worded silence that only books can give me. Let me know what you think about all this.